Elected as the first non-communist president in Czechoslovakia in over 40 years, Václav Havel felt dubious about the success of his movement, facing a sensation of the absurd, what Sisyphus might have felt if one fine day his boulder stopped, unprepared for the possibility that his efforts might succeed. In our modern world, hope is feeble and apathy and inaction are widespread. However, the case of Havel's Czechoslovakia reminds us that democracy can prevail despite the odds, dependent on a small number who dare to be called dissidents just to speak their beliefs. In a series of protests that had been culminating over decades, the Velvet Revolution serves as a remarkable testament to the power of the people to urge social reform through their non-violent volition. Czechoslovakia lived shorter than a century, yet its people made an indelible mark on the world. Created from the regions of Bohemia, Moravia, and Slovakia, the country was formed from the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, unifying in 1918 in a marriage of convenience. After World War I, Czechoslovakia was governed democratically, existing as a politically and economically modern state. After the occupation by Nazi Germany in World War II, however, the Prague coup of 1948 established Czechoslovakia as a Marxist-Leninist state. This system emphasized the need for a proletarian dictatorship, involving a strict crackdown on every aspect of public life, including individual rights and fundamental freedoms. In 1967, catalyzed by student demonstrations over power shortages, Soviet powers replaced the secretary of the Communist Party with the more liberal Alexander Dubček, who promoted his campaign of policy as socialism with a human face. Over the next year, Dubček proposed numerous reforms such as creating greater equality, abolishing censorship, easing the persecution of clergymen, and decriminalizing small businesses. This era, known as the Prague Spring, was the taste of liberation which ensured that hardline communism could never prevail. The Communist Party detested Dubček's socialism. On August 20, 1968, in the largest military operation in Europe since World War II, between 250 to 500,000 Warsaw Pact soldiers captured all Czechoslovakian state institutions in a campaign of violence. This intervention replaced Dubček with the authoritarian Gustav Husak, a hardline communist who promoted so-called socialism in a goose skin, a return to autocratic rule which continued with his successor in 1987, Miloš Žáček. On January 16, 1969, Jan Palach, a 20-year-old student, doused himself in gasoline, inhaling its fumes, and lit a match. On the steps of the National Museum, Palach's immolation death shocked the nation. In his suicide note, he called himself Torch Number 1 and claimed to want to wake up the people of this land, shaking them out of indifference to their new circumstances. His funeral, held on January 25th, was attended by 200,000 people, proving his entrance into martyrdom, yet it took 20 more years for his message to sink in. The year 1989 was turbulent with social change across Eastern Europe. After Mikhail Gorbachev became chairman of the Soviet Communist Party, ideas like perestroika, economic freedom, and glasnost, openness, proliferated Soviet politics. Additionally, the Solidarność movement in Poland and roundtable discussions in Hungary furthered democracy across the Eastern Bloc, yet for much of that year, the Czechoslovakian government remained strict. In January, tensions were coming to the surface. On the 15th, around 2,000 gathered in Wenceslas Square to commemorate Jan Palach's act. For 6 days during the following Palach week, thousands received brutal beatings by riot police armed with tear gas and truncheons, who ended up arresting 800 people, including the leaders of Charter 77, a liberal organization created by dissidents to protect human rights. Václav Havel, one of the leaders of this group, had emerged throughout the 60s as an acclaimed, albeit banned, playwright. For trying to place flowers at the statue of St. Wenceslas during the January protests, Havel was sentenced to 9 months in jail. Gatherings on August 21st, marking the anniversary of the Soviet occupation, foreshadowed the reckoning to come, with thousands of protesters singing the national anthem, shouting slander, and chanting the names of Havel and Dubček. The night ended with 300 arrests being made, but the decline of communism was irrevocably in motion. On November 17, 1989, a gathering to remember a student killed by the Nazis devolved into chaos, becoming anti-government in flavor, with students shouting, "Dialogue, dialogue, we don't want the Communist Party, and 40 years are enough," carrying signs emblazoned with freedom and "Stop beating students." Riot police responded to the scene, brandishing batons and leading unmuzzled dogs into the crowd, injuring hundreds. The false claim that one student had been killed inspired more protests. On the 19th and 20th of November, demonstrations numbered in the 200,000s, with protesters calling out, "Today Prague, tomorrow the whole country. It's the end, Miloš, and Žákiš out." Indeed, protests soon spread across the country. Despite the government's profound fear of the movement, crowds never turned aggressive, instead taking to civil disobedience. Using homemade signs with catchy slogans, people covered up symbols of the regime. In this subversion of communist repression, joyous crowds ascended trees, sang the national anthem, and rattled their key rings. Businesses across Prague were shuttered. On November 20th, Havel formed the Civic Forum as an association to all who wanted democracy, meeting with the Prime Minister Ladislav Adamec, who agreed to future discussions. As demonstrations continued, swelling in size, Alexander Dubček returned to Prague for the first time since his exile. On the 24th, in front of 250,000 protesters, he pronounced, "Long live socialism with a human face." At the committee of the Communist Party that day, an emergency meeting led to the resignation of Žákiš, Husak, and other hardliners from the Presidium. Protests on the 26th reached sizes of 800,000. On the 27th, a general workers' strike attracted a whopping 60% of Czechoslovak workers. On the 28th, Adamec conceded, promising to bring the views of the public and the Civic Forum to the president. He would call for a new multi-party government and propose to the Federal Assembly deep changes to the Constitution, such as deleting the leading role of the Communist Party and undermining its dominion over education. Adamec officially resigned his post on the 7th of December, followed by Husak. After this, the interim Prime Minister, Marian Čalfa, formed a new cabinet with a majority of non-communists. On December 29th, the cabinet unanimously elected the incredulous Václav Havel as president. According to the polls, he was supported by 3/4 of the population. On the 30th, in a ceremony led by Dubček, newly elected as chairman of the Federal Assembly, Havel was sworn into his role inside the historic Prague Castle, reading a revised presidential oath with the stipulation to serve the cause of socialism removed. He then stood for a rendition of the national anthem, the soundtrack of the revolution, just months separated from his imprisonment. The first free election was held on June 8th of 1990, wherein the Communist Party finished second. Economists and Prime Minister Václav Klaus's ideas of shock therapy, including the rapid liberalization of prices, foreign trade, the exchange rate, and the privatization of assets, led to a rise in inflation and a transformational recession which resulted in high rates of inequality. Unemployment was a serious problem, something that was more pronounced in Slovakia. Czechs and Slovaks also possessed vastly different visions of transformation. Czech lands were more suited for a market system, while Slovakia's economy was dependent on state-sponsored industry, which, when scaled down during economic reform, disproportionately affected them. During this time, populist Vladimir Mečiar, advocating for a more gradual transition, rose to power as Prime Minister of Slovakia. In the Velvet Divorce, Klaus and Mečiar announced the breakup of the country, made official come 1993, a contrast to the violent separation of Yugoslavia. European integration was slow. In 1996, accession negotiations finally started, and the Czech and Slovak republics were allowed to join the European Union in 2004. Like Havel predicted, the struggles of the communist era are not fleeting evils. They return time and time again. Andrej Babiš, the billionaire leader of the Action of Dissatisfied Citizens Party, who became prime minister in 2017, on a populist, anti-corruption, and anti-establishment platform, has raised many concerns. Accused of business fraud and collaboration with the communist secret police, he has prompted numerous protests, some as large as the Velvet Revolution in 2019. In 2018, the murder of journalist Jan Kuciak, investigating Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, was a traumatizing reminder of the dangers of government tyranny, spurring protests across Slovakia. Both Babiš and Fico are currently in power. Václav Havel died in 2011, before the chaos of the last decade. The nuns caring for him at the time of his death described it as like a candle going out, so quiet. Yet the torch that Havel and other dissidents carried, passed on by previous generations, has not extinguished. In the Velvet Revolution, the people of Czechoslovakia learned the powers of their own bodies and minds to exert change over a restrictive regime unopen to suggestion. While the equilibrium might shift, and it may seem like a Sisyphean task to try to return righteousness to government, one day, with persistent effort, that moment will come around when, despite all odds, good wins. While Havel had a firm belief in the hope that we must have that things will get better, he also reasserted the need to take action, something modeled by the mobilization of the Czech and Slovak peoples. It is not enough to stare up the steps. We must step up the stairs, he wrote, into the dark as it may be.
Denního spěchu sní přísloví hlas, každý ví, časy se mění.